This is the Discovery Files podcast from the U.S. National Science Foundation. The Global Artificial Intelligence Research Agenda is a new document crafted by an interagency effort. It provides guidance for funders, researchers, and publishers to support the entire artificial intelligence research ecosystem, from foundational discoveries to broader societal applications. We're joined by Jillian Mammino, a contractor at the U.S. Department of State in the Bureau of Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs, Mary Beech, Director of Workers and Technology Policy in the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of the Assistant Secretary for Policy, and Craig Jolley, a Senior Data Scientist in the Bureau for Inclusive Growth, Partnerships, and Innovation at the U.S. Agency for International Development. Thank you all for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
Good to be with you.
Thanks for having me.
Jillian, I'd like to start with you. With the State Department releasing this document, I'd like to ask you the big question. What is the Global Artificial Intelligence Research Agenda?
The Global AI Research Agenda was announced and released by Secretary Blinken on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. And if you're interested in reading or downloading the document, you can find it on our State Department website. The Global AI Research Agenda delivers on President Biden's executive order on the safe, secure, and trustworthy development and use of artificial intelligence, and specifically Section 11.C.2, strengthening American leadership abroad. It includes principles, guidelines, priorities, and best practices aimed at ensuring the safe, secure, and trustworthy development and adoption of AI. And additionally addresses AI's labor market implications across international contexts and includes several recommended risk mitigations for these topics. I think importantly that it emphasizes the need for a holistic approach to AI research and development, which considers both the technical advances of AI systems and their applications and the resulting interactions between AI technologies and then the individuals, communities, and societies within different global contexts.
Mary, with part of the order looking at international labor market implications and thinking about how technology can impact behavior and cultures, can you tell us a bit about how AI is impacting the workforce?
Absolutely. And there's, I think, a lot to unpack in that question there. And we're seeing as AI is implemented more broadly, its impact on workers is already far-reaching. It's complex, and sometimes it's even contradictory. So, it's important to really, I think, unpack what it means for different people in different places who are performing different jobs. We know that there'll be a lot of variation. There already is across industries, across jobs, tasks, geographies, and different demographic groups. But also, I think it's important to really recognize that outcomes will depend on the choices that we all make today. And while there might be a lot of uncertainty about how these technologies will evolve over time, it is really critical to take steps now so that we're making sure that we are setting up a situation and where workers will benefit from these changes and that they're protected both today, but then also for decades down the line. And I want to emphasize here, we also have a keen eye towards making sure that we're focused on those who are most vulnerable during this time of transition and continued change.
Right. There's a lot of fear among the general public right now as people are kind of figuring out what AI is.
Absolutely. As generative AI has sort of burst on the scene the last couple years, I think it's increased the public's awareness about what these technologies may be capable of doing. That certainly can lead folks to have a lot of different questions. And so we want to be proactively meeting that moment.
And there's a bit of fact checking there as you're separating out science fiction artificial intelligence from what's actually out there.
There's a lot of, I think, need for also just being able to make sure that people, including workers, have information about what these technologies are and how they might be able to help them now, but also the limitations on the use of these technologies and where it's important to consider how these technologies may not be perfect in a number of different ways and where it's really important for humans to be involved, both in their development and in their use.
Jillian, can you tell me a bit about how the document came together?
The first thing we thought was really important was to put out a request for information or an RFI. And so that was a broad call that we did back in, I think, March of this year. And we really wanted to engage the public and hear what they had to say in response to both a brief outline that we had put together and then different questions that were on our minds, specifically the ones about AI research principles, as we felt that that was a gap. And I think if you read the document, it's still kind of an open area for conversation. The second thing that we did is we held stakeholder consultations, and we really do appreciate the organizations who engaged with us and helped to convene some of these consultations of both domestic perspectives and international perspectives. And this included academia, think tanks, and civil society organizations. And then finally, we did call for international input through the U.S. embassies that we have abroad. We had them reach out to the relevant counterparts and flag our request for information.
Craig, thinking about some of those international partners, can you tell us about how the document works to bring AI to some of those more diverse demographics?
Yeah, so the GAIRA really does focus on bringing the potential benefits of AI to everyone. If you have listeners who are on the technical side, they'll understand that machine learning systems typically struggle with what we call out-of-sample generalization, making reasonable predictions about data that is not reflective of the probability distribution of the data on which they were trained. And so in normal person terms, what this means is that they do not function well in situations that are very different from what they are trained on. They don't extrapolate typically well. And so what we see on the whole is that today's models are trained primarily on data from developed countries, from rich countries. And we don't know what to expect when they're deployed in the developing world. They might work well, in a lot of cases they might not. And this could lead to AI tools that make mistakes or are less safe or maybe are just less useful for people who are living in different global contexts. And one really concrete example of that is when it comes to language. There's just a handful of languages that make up the vast majority of content on the internet and the vast majority of the training data that went into the large language models that we have today. This means that they are very, very good at English, but when you have what we sometimes call low resource languages that were not heavily represented in those training data, you might have models that are less safe or that make mistakes or that just don't do as well in those languages, despite the fact that those are languages spoken by hundreds of millions of people. And there are a lot of really smart people in the private sector, in academia, in various places who are working to address this. But it's a really serious problem for the current generation of AI systems, and it's going to take a lot of work to address that.
That's interesting. I hadn't really considered how the source languages being input into the AI models might impact them and how useful they are for some users.
Yeah, so I had a really interesting experience a couple of weeks ago. I was at an AI conference in Dakar, Senegal. It's called Deep Learning in Daba. And I was in a session where we were discussing this problem of underrepresented languages. And one of the speakers asked how many people in the room spoke an African language. Of course, I don't, but most people in the room raised their hand. And then she asked how many people can read in that language, and maybe half the hands went down. And then she asked how many people can write in that language, and there were still a few hands up. And then she asked, now, what would you do if you had to write your bachelor's thesis in that language? And all of the people who still had their hands up just laughed at that point. These are languages where even very educated, very talented people are not producing the kinds of technical, high-quality content in those languages that they're producing in maybe their second or their third language that they've learned. And so there's really a need not just to build models, but also just to revitalize the use of some of these traditional languages that maybe have been neglected over the last decades and centuries.
Now, I've talked to a few people about how they're using AI for kind of data processing or data management, data analysis. How does GAIRA support using AI for broader kinds of global challenges?
We have a section in the GAIRA on AI for global challenges, and it focuses on a few specific areas. We talk about climate change, about health, agriculture and food security, and then about general applications in science and engineering. And in each of those cases, we identify some priority areas of work. And some of those things are very technical in terms of types of models that need to be developed. And a lot of them are more of this sort of ecosystem support about standardizing data formats and finding ways for people to work together better that can advance work in those areas. So, for example, in health, we focus on things like interoperable standards, on protecting patient privacy, and on building an implementation science evidence base to understand the effectiveness of health applications. And we're really hoping that those kinds of cross-cutting efforts can help to remove obstacles across the field and make it easier for a diverse range of researchers to come in and really do high-quality work in that area. The climate area is also a special one, just because there's this duality to it, where AI has a lot of potential to enable climate solutions, but we've been hearing more and more lately about the growing energy footprint of AI and the negative climate externalities that come with that. And so what we've tried to do in the GAIRA is to encourage climate positive applications in areas like energy efficiency and clean energy deployment and disaster response, but also working to reduce AI's resource demands and to develop more efficient models and computing hardware.
Mary, bringing it back to the human perspective, how does GAIRA address the more global labor market implications of AI?
Here, I think it's really important to examine how these impacts vary in different countries, regions, sectors, and occupations, and also to consider various aspects of identity and social factors. So in order to understand job augmentation and automation and how that's occurring or projected to occur, it'll be important to really study AI's impact on specific tasks in order to forecast employment trends in different labor markets. In addition, it'll be very important to understand what types of new jobs may result from AI development, deployment, and use. So this means really identifying jobs throughout the AI value chain, including those involved in supporting the development of AI systems, such as data enrichment workers, and for these jobs, working to document their locations, the industries, quality, tasks, and impact on worker well-being, in particular through engaging directly with workers themselves who are working at various points throughout the AI value chain. It'll also be really important to understand the potential impacts on inequality. So how increased adoption of AI is impacting income inequality and wealth distribution, both within and among countries, and to conduct research on risks for workers, which could include increased data collection and monitoring, de-skilling, well-being, including physical and mental health, discrimination in hiring and other employment decisions, misclassification, and also, I really want to emphasize that the research agenda provides questions that are meant to inform how to prevent and mitigate the risks of AI related to workers in the labor market, including those that aim to address potential labor market disruptions, studying how worker voice and representation and decision-making. And then, as I mentioned, the value chain continues to come up a lot in the global conversations around AI. And so improving the understanding of the AI value chain will continue to be important. In particular, the research agenda encourages companies to report information about their value chains and to explore how we could best enforce labor laws throughout the value chain and identify gaps in enforcement frameworks.
Jillian, I'm going to close out our conversation by asking you another bigger question. Why do we need this document?
I think most listeners of this podcast know that AI has the potential to help our people solve urgent and global challenges and contribute to global prosperity, productivity, innovation, and security. But at the same time, that irresponsible use could exacerbate societal harms. And so harnessing AI for quote unquote good really demands a society-wide effort that includes global government, private sector, academia, and civil society. And so the Global AI Research Agenda outlines critical research opportunities for international collaboration, including highlighting AI's potential to help advance achievement of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And leveraging AI for the Sustainable Development Goals is an ongoing conversation and a priority which Secretary Blinken himself has elevated both last year in 2023 and again at a follow-on event this year, which actually just took place. We really value the GAIRA by prioritizing safety, security, human rights, inclusivity, and trust so that stakeholders working within the AI ecosystem can maximize AI benefits while minimizing the risks. The research agenda elevates opportunities specifically for academics and researchers to contribute to a body of evidence to guide policy and decision makers towards this overarching goal. And Socio-technical isn't a term maybe a lot of people are really familiar with outside of the science, tech, society fields. I think that it's really important that this document brings additional focus to this type of research to better explore the nuance of the context-specific nature of AI deployments and the real need for a deeper understanding of how technology, and specifically AI technologies, can interact with and influence human behavior, cultures, and institutions. Finally, the science and research ecosystem itself is innately international, and it's important for us as a U.S. government to elevate the preferred characteristics in the AI research enterprise that align with shared global values, such as inclusion and equity, responsible research conduct, partnership and collaboration, and respect for human rights, of course. Ultimately, we believe that the future of technology lies in digital solidarity, and that's the recognition that as individual users or large organizations, we are all more secure, resilient, self-determining, and prosperous when we all work together to shape the international AI ecosystem and innovate at the technological edge. Collaboration and interaction across borders really is crucial for advancing AI research.
Special thanks to Mary Beech, Craig Jolley, and Jillian Mammino. For the Discovery Files, I'm Nate Potker. Please subscribe wherever you get podcasts, and if you like our program, share with a friend and consider leaving a review. Discover how the U.S. National Science Foundation is advancing research at nsf.gov.